Odessa Whitfield had crossed the same Atlanta intersection every Tuesday for 6 years, blind, trusting a sound she'd memorized in place of sight she no longer had. One Tuesday, that trust nearly cost her everything, until a stranger named Oh Tae-min pulled her back from a truck that never saw her coming. Her granddaughter Zora had no room in her life for anything beyond keeping her grandmother safe and the bills paid. Odessa saw what her granddaughter couldn't yet believe, that the man kept coming back for reasons that had nothing to do with guilt. Zora finally let him in. Since then, the danger became real. Surveillance, a warning in the driveway, a customs shipment sabotaged to bleed Tae-min's business. Zora turned to her own community for help, and it worked. Kang Jin realized she wasn't a weakness. She was a counter-strategy. So he stopped watching from parked cars and started planning to get closer, using people who could blend in instead. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, parts 1 through 4 are everything you need. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. Now let's get into part 4. The new hire started at the pharmacy on a Monday, a soft-spoken woman named Grace, who claimed to be new to Atlanta, recently relocated from Charlotte for a fresh start after a difficult divorce. A story so specifically calibrated to invite sympathy and lower guards that Do-hyun flagged it within a day of hearing about it secondhand. Charlotte, Do-hyun said, when Zora mentioned her new coworker over dinner that evening, something immediately sharpening in his attention. That's not a coincidence I'm comfortable with. She seems nice, Zora said, though something in Do-hyun's reaction made her replay the day's interactions more carefully. Quiet. Asked a lot of questions about the neighborhood, actually, now that I think about it. Which businesses I trusted, who I talked to regularly, that kind of thing. I figured she was just trying to get oriented. Or she was mapping your network, Tae-min said grimly. The same network that helped us identify his surveillance team last week. If Kang Jin's smart enough to recalibrate his strategy, and he clearly is, infiltrating the exact community you used against him is the obvious next move. You think she's one of his people? I think it's worth finding out for certain before we assume anything, Tae-min said, but the timing, the location she claims to be from, the specific questions she's asking, none of it reads as coincidence to me. Do-hyun was already making notes. I'll run a background check, quietly. If her story doesn't hold up under scrutiny, we'll know within 48 hours. And if it does hold up, Zora asked, what if she really is just a woman starting over who happened to ask a few too many questions on her first week? Then we apologize privately for the suspicion and move on, Tae-min said, but I'd rather investigate a false alarm than ignore a real one. That's not a risk I'm willing to take with you working alongside her every shift. How does this even work? Zora asked. The background check, I mean. What are you actually looking for? Specifically, when you run someone's history through your own channels instead of a normal one. Financial trails, mostly, Do-hyun said. Employment history that doesn't quite line up, social security numbers that trace back to inconsistencies most people never bother checking. A well-built false identity can survive a casual glance. It rarely survives someone who knows exactly what inconsistencies to look for, because they've built false identities themselves for considerably less benign reasons than starting over after a divorce. That's a strange thing to be good at, Zora said, something wry entering her voice, despite the tension of the whole conversation. It's a necessary skill in this particular line of work, Do-hyun said. I'd rather not have needed to develop it. But I have, and right now that skill is the only thing standing between an unverified stranger and full access to your daily routine. Tae-min watched the exchange with something grim settling into his expression. I hate that this is necessary, he said. I hate that you can't simply enjoy a new coworker without wondering whether she's real. I know, Zora said, but I'd rather know the truth, however uncomfortable it turns out to be, than keep trusting someone who might not deserve it at all. You taught me that, actually, without meaning to, the night you finally told me everything on the porch instead of protecting me from it. I suppose I did, Tae-min said, something almost rueful in his tone. I didn't expect the lesson to apply this quickly to someone else's deception instead of my own. The background check came back considerably faster than 48 hours, and considerably more troubling than any of them had braced for. Grace Miller doesn't exist, Do-hyun reported the following afternoon, spreading a thin folder across the kitchen table where Taemin and Zora sat waiting. Not before 6 weeks ago, at least. No employment history prior to that. No verifiable residence in Charlotte. The social security number attached to her pharmacy application traces to a woman who died 11 years ago in Ohio, which means someone constructed this identity specifically and did it well enough that it passed the pharmacy's standard background screening. That's not the profile of a random opportunist, Taemin said. That's the profile of someone with resources building a legend. Kang Jin's resources, Zora said, something cold settling into her chest despite the warmth of the kitchen. I've been standing next to her for a week. Handing her prescription bottles, talking about my grandmother. You didn't know, Taemin said, reaching for her hand. That's exactly the point of a legend this well built. It's designed to survive scrutiny long enough to accomplish whatever it was actually built for. What do we do? Zora asked. I can't just stop showing up to work. That's my income, on top of everything else. You don't have to stop, Taemin said. But everything changes about how carefully we handle this. I want a security presence inside the pharmacy itself, not just around the house. I want to understand exactly what information she's already gathered, if any, before we decide whether to confront her directly or simply monitor her until we understand who she's actually reporting to. Do-hyun nodded. I'd lean toward monitoring first. If we confront her too early, Kang Jin simply builds another legend and starts over somewhere we haven't identified yet. If we watch her carefully, she might actually lead us to understand his full operational structure in this city, which could be worth considerably more than the satisfaction of exposing her immediately. I don't like the idea of pretending everything's normal while I know she's not who she claims to be, Zora admitted. I know, Taemin said, but it might be the smartest path to actually ending this, instead of just delaying the next version of it. What if I'm not good at pretending? Zora asked. I've never had to lie to someone's face for an extended period before. I don't know if I have the skill for it. You don't have to lie extensively, Do-hyun said. Just maintain the same friendliness you've already been showing her. She has no reason to suspect you know anything yet. The moment your behavior shifts noticeably, she'll report that shift, and Kang Jin will simply pull the operation and rebuild elsewhere before we've learned anything useful. That's a lot of pressure to put on just acting normal, Zora said, something wry entering her voice despite the genuine weight of the request. It is, Taemin agreed. I won't pretend otherwise. I also won't pretend I have a better option available right now that doesn't put you or your grandmother at greater risk than continuing this careful monitoring does. He studied her for a long moment. If it becomes too much, at any point, tell me immediately. I'd rather move too early and lose the intelligence advantage than watch you carry a weight you're not equipped to carry safely. I can do this, Zora said, something steadying in her own voice as she said it. I've spent 6 years managing considerably harder things than being pleasant to a woman I don't trust for a few more days. This isn't the hardest thing I've had to fake my way through. I believe you, Taemin said. I just want you to know you don't have to prove that to me. This isn't a test of your strength. It's a genuine risk I'm asking you to help manage, and I take that seriously, more seriously than I've taken almost anything in my adult life. Do-hyun gathered his notes very carefully, preparing to leave for the evening. I'll have additional surveillance in place by tomorrow morning, he said. Discreet, positioned to track her movements without alerting her to our awareness. If she meets with anyone connected to Kang Jin's organization, we'll know within hours. The friendly new coworker asking all the right questions turns out to have no real past at all. Like and subscribe to help us grow so we can create more content like this, if that reveal just gave you chills. This one's getting considerably more dangerous. Stay close. Odessa heard about Grace 3 days later, over dinner, the specific quiet attention she brought to every new piece of information, settling over her the moment Zora mentioned the woman's name. Tell me exactly how she sounds, Odessa said. Not what she looks like, how she talks. What her voice does when she asks a question versus when she answers one. Zora considered the request, something in her grandmother's specific focus telling her this wasn't idle curiosity. She's careful. Zora said finally. Measured. Every question sounds casual, but now that I think about it, they're never random. She always circles back to specific things: who I trust, who I talk to, what my schedule looks like on days you're not around. That's not idle curiosity, Odessa said. That's someone extracting information methodically, dressed up as friendliness. I've met people like that before, baby, long before you were born. Con artists, mostly, back when I was still sighted enough to fall for a few of them myself before I learned better. They all share that same quality, an interest that sounds warm, but never actually gives anything back in return. Real friendship trades information both directions. Hers only moves one way. I should have noticed that myself, Zora said, something frustrated entering her voice. You were distracted by kindness, Odessa said. That's not a failure, baby. That's simply what happens when someone builds a performance specifically designed to exploit the fact that you're a kind person who assumes good faith in others. The failure would be continuing to trust her now that you understand what she actually is. What do you think I should do? Odessa was quiet for a moment, turning the question over with the specific care she brought to every serious decision. I think you should let Taemin's people handle the watching, she said. That's not your skill, baby, and pretending otherwise puts you at more risk than the situation requires. But I think you should also trust your own instincts more than you have been. You noticed something felt wrong before Do-hyun ever confirmed it with his investigation. That instinct is worth more than you're currently giving it credit for. I didn't trust it enough to say anything until you asked. Then start trusting it sooner, Odessa said. The next time something feels off, baby, don't wait for someone else to confirm it before you take it seriously yourself. How did you learn to read people so well, Grandma? Before you lost your sight, I mean. Was it always like this, or did it develop after? Odessa considered the question, something reflective settling into her expression. Some of it was always there, she said. I was a seamstress for 30 years, baby. You learn to read people in that work. Who's telling you the truth about their measurements versus who's embarrassed and shaving off an inch here or there, who's buying a dress for a happy occasion versus who's buying armor to survive a difficult one. Fabric and thread taught me more about human nature than most conversations ever could. She paused. But losing my sight sharpened it considerably. When you can't see someone's face, you learn to listen for the things faces usually hide. The hesitation before an answer, the specific quality of a laugh that's covering something, instead of expressing genuine amusement. I don't think I'd trade my sight back even if I could, some days. I understand people considerably better now than I ever did with my eyes working. That's a strange kind of gift to find inside a loss, Zora said. Most real gifts arrive that way, Odessa said. Wrapped up in something you'd never have chosen for yourself. I didn't choose to go blind, baby, but I chose what to build out of it, same as you're choosing what to build out of everything that's happened to you these past several weeks. That's the part that actually matters, not what happens to us, but what we decide to do with it afterward. I love you, Grandma, Zora said, something full in her chest as she said it. I love you too, baby, Odessa said. Now go be careful around that woman tomorrow. Smile at her. Ask about her day. And don't you dare let her see one single thing that tells her you already know she's lying. The confirmation Do-hyun had been waiting for arrived on a Thursday afternoon, when Grace excused herself from the pharmacy counter, claiming a doctor's appointment, and instead drove directly to a rented house on the outskirts of the city, a house Do-hyun's surveillance identified as a temporary operational base for at least 3 other individuals connected to Kang Jin's organization. She's not working alone, Do-hyun reported that evening. There's at least a small team operating out of that house. We identified 2 others coming and going over the past 6 hours, neither of whom match any profile we'd already flagged from the Savannah operation. This is a separate cell, built specifically for the neighborhood infiltration. How close have they gotten to actual information? Taemin asked. Closer than I'd like, Do-hyun admitted. Grace has your work schedule memorized, Zora, along with your grandmother's typical daily routine, when she's usually home alone, which neighbors check in on her, which afternoons the house sits empty while you're both out. That's not casual observation, that's operational planning. Zora felt something cold settle deep in her chest, considerably sharper than the general fear she'd been managing since the driveway confrontation weeks earlier. They know when my grandmother's alone. They know the pattern, Taemin said. Which means we change the pattern, immediately, starting tonight. No more predictable schedules. Security stays with your grandmother at all hours she's not directly with you, not just monitoring from outside. Should I quit the pharmacy? Zora asked. Stop giving her access to me at all? Not yet, Do-hyun said. If you disappear from work suddenly, they'll know we've identified them, and Kang-jin will simply rebuild the operation somewhere we haven't found yet. If we let this play out carefully, we have the chance to actually dismantle this cell entirely, instead of just scattering it temporarily. That means continuing to work next to a woman I know is lying to me, Zora said. Every single day, pretending I don't know. I understand how difficult that is, Taemin said. I wouldn't ask it of you if I saw another way to end this permanently, instead of just delaying it. But I think you're considerably stronger than even I gave you credit for a month ago, and I think you can hold that difficult line if it means actually finishing this fight. Zora sat with that for a long moment, something resolved settling into her expression despite the fear still running underneath it. How long do you think this will take? She asked. The monitoring, before you have enough to actually act? Days, most likely, Do-hyun said. Not weeks. Operations like this rarely stay static for long. She's clearly gathering information toward a specific goal, which means she'll need to act on it or report it soon, and either action gives us the opening we need. What happens to her once you've confirmed everything? Zora asked. Grace, I mean. Does she just disappear? Does something happen to her? That depends considerably on what we find, Taemin said carefully. If she's simply a paid operative following instructions, the goal is to remove her presence from your life and send a clear enough message to Kang-jin that continuing this particular strategy costs him more than it's worth. I'm not interested in escalating toward violence, unless violence is already what we're facing. I'd rather win this by being smarter than him, not simply more ruthless. That's a relief to hear, Zora admitted. I don't think I could live with myself if something terrible happened to her because of information I provided, even unknowingly. That's part of why I'm telling you the strategy plainly, Taemin said. I don't want you carrying guilt for decisions that are mine to make and mine to answer for. You're helping us understand the shape of the threat. What we do with that understanding is my responsibility, not yours. Then let's finish it, Zora said. Properly, this time. Not just surviving the next thing they throw at us. The friendly coworker just got confirmed as part of an entire cell built to study her grandmother's schedule. Like and subscribe to help us grow so we can create more content like this one. If you're as unsettled by that as Zora is, this is about to come to a head. Stay close. The operation to dismantle the cell moved faster than any of them expected once Taemin committed fully to it. His organization's considerable resources finally applied directly to a threat he'd spent weeks managing cautiously instead of confronting head-on. Do-hyun's team traced the rented house's financing back through 3 shell layers to an account Kang-jin himself had used before, careless enough in the urgency of building the operation quickly that it left a thread considerably easier to pull than his usual meticulous structuring allowed for. We have him, Do-hyun said, presenting the evidence to Taemin on a Sunday morning. Direct financial ties, documented, admissible if it ever needs to be. More importantly, we know exactly who's in that house and what they've gathered. We can move on the cell itself, tonight, before they act on any of it. Do it, Taemin said, quietly. I want them gone from this city by morning, and I want Kang-jin to understand precisely why his infiltration failed, without giving him grounds to escalate into open conflict. The operation unfolded overnight. Do-hyun's people moving on the rented house with the specific efficient discretion of an organization that had spent 11 years perfecting exactly this kind of intervention. The 3 operatives inside relocated out of the city by dawn, with a clarity about the consequences of returning that required no further explanation. Grace didn't show up for her shift the following Monday. She never came back. The pharmacy manager mentioned, in passing, that Grace had called to say a family emergency required her to relocate suddenly, apologizing for the short notice and leaving no forwarding information. Zora accepted the explanation with a nod and a practiced expression of mild sympathy, understanding exactly what the words actually meant underneath their polite surface. Zora found Taemin on the porch that evening, the specific relief of a genuine ending finally settling over the house after weeks of sustained tension. "It's really over," she said. "That particular threat, at least. That particular cell, yes," Taemin said. "I won't pretend Kongjin's finished entirely. A man like that doesn't simply give up after one failed operation. But this specific danger, to you and your grandmother directly, that's resolved. He's lost his access to this neighborhood, and rebuilding it will take him considerably longer than he has patience for right now." "What happens next?" Zora asked. "I don't know exactly," Taemin admitted, "but I know I'd rather face whatever comes next with you beside me, actually fighting alongside me, than trying to manage it from a careful distance, the way I tried to at the start of all this." He reached for her hand. "You've taught me something these past several weeks that 11 years of running an organization never managed to teach me, that protecting someone properly sometimes means trusting them enough to fight beside you, instead of simply standing guard in front of them. I think we make a considerably better team than either of us expected," Zora said. "I think so too," Taemin agreed. They sat together as the evening settled fully around them, the specific quiet of a threat genuinely resolved rather than merely survived. Zora found herself thinking back to the intersection where all of this had started. The sound of the truck, the specific stillness of a stranger's hand closing around her grandmother's arm, and marveling at how far they'd traveled since then, through fear and danger and a truth neither of them had expected to have to navigate this early. "Can I tell you something?" Zora said. "I think, before all of this, before the surveillance and Grace and everything since, I would have run from a relationship this complicated. I would have decided it was too much, too dangerous, too far outside anything I had room for." "What changed?" "I think I stopped being afraid of the complications and started being afraid of what I'd lose if I let fear make the decision for me," Zora said. "My grandmother taught me that, actually. She said fear wearing love's clothes still isn't love. I think I finally understand what she meant." "Your grandmother," Taemin said, something warm entering his voice, "might be the wisest person either of us has ever met." "She'd agree with you completely," Zora said, laughing. "She's never once been shy about her own wisdom." Odessa's voice carried faintly from inside the house, unmistakably having heard at least part of the exchange despite the distance. "I heard that, and I'll take the compliment," she called. "Now come inside, both of you. This old woman would like some company before bed, and I suspect you two have considerably more to talk through than a porch swing usually allows for." Yu Kangjin received the news of the dismantled cell with the specific controlled stillness of a man absorbing a loss he hadn't fully prepared himself to accept. "All three relocated within hours," his assistant reported, Grace included. "The house is being watched now. We'd be walking directly into a trap if we tried to rebuild there." Kang Jin was quiet for a long moment, something recalculating behind his composed expression that hadn't fully settled since the operation's failure reached him that morning. "2 attempts," he said finally. "Direct surveillance, then infiltration. Both identified and dismantled within weeks. I've underestimated this situation considerably more than I initially accounted for. How do you want to proceed?" "I think," Kang Jin said slowly, "it's time I stopped sending people to do what I should perhaps be handling myself. Oh, Taemin has built something in Atlanta I clearly don't fully understand yet. Not just a woman he's protecting, but an entire operation that adapts faster than any single cell I send against it can account for." He crossed to the window, something decided settling into his posture. "Perhaps it's time I visited Atlanta myself, not to threaten, to understand exactly what I'm actually up against, before I commit any further resources to a fight I clearly haven't properly scouted." His assistant hesitated. "That's considerably more exposure than you've ever accepted directly, in any operation." "I know. Kang Jin said. But I've spent 2 failed attempts trying to solve this from a distance. Some problems require closer study than a report can provide. I'd like to see this woman for myself, and I'd like Oh Tae-min to know I'm watching. Personally, instead of through intermediaries, he can simply dismantle one at a time. What's the actual objective of the visit? If not a direct threat, what are you hoping to accomplish? Kang Jin considered the question with the specific patience that had defined his entire career. Even now, with 2 failures behind him and something considerably more personal beginning to color his decision-making than he'd typically permit himself. I want to understand what he's actually built, he said. Not the security, not the resources. Those are simply tools. I want to understand the woman herself. What makes a man who's spent 11 years without a single vulnerability suddenly willing to fight this hard, this personally, against every instinct that kept him alive this long? If I understand that, I understand the actual leverage point, instead of guessing at it through failed operations. And if what you find changes your approach entirely, then it changes, Kang Jin said. I've built my career on adapting to what the evidence actually shows me, rather than what I initially assumed before gathering it. 2 failed operations have taught me that assumptions about Oh Tae-min are considerably less reliable than I once believed. I'd rather see the truth myself than continue operating on assumptions that keep costing me resources and credibility. When do you want to travel? Soon, Kang Jin said, before he has the chance to build additional defenses around whatever weakness I'm still trying to properly understand. I'd rather arrive while the situation is still evolving than wait until he's had time to fortify it completely against whatever I decide to do next. His assistant made a final note, closing the file. I'll arrange the travel quietly, he said, under a name that won't trigger any alerts his people might have flagged for you specifically. Good, Kang Jin said. Let's find out exactly what I've been underestimating. 2 attempts failed, and now Kang Jin's decided to come to Atlanta himself. Comment if you think a direct confrontation finally ends this, or if it makes everything considerably more dangerous. Part 5 is coming.